Hey guys, for today's episode, I am joined by Andrew Lewis, the head of talent at Worldly. We had a bit of a technical difficulty in getting the recording started, hence this introduction. But from here, I will kick it over to Andrew to tell us a little bit about himself. Andrew, let's start with, just telling me a little bit about yourself.
So my name is Andrew Lewis. I am the head of talent acquisition at an organization called Worldly. I guess a quick career summary. I have been in the talent acquisition recruitment space for over 8 years now. Started like most people on the agency side and kind of stumbled my way into the industry. Actually have a degree in exercise physiology. The original plan coming out of college was to get into physical therapy. I was having some difficulty coming out of college to find a job that even paid a living wage, and so I had kind of gotten fed up in my job search and was like, you know what, I have 5 years of professional experience. I've worked in banking my whole time in college. Let me go see what's out there and what I can maybe consider, as I pivot. And I happened to be managing a gym at that time, and I had a former employee who actually joined a staffing agency. And so I had been talking with her, and she's like, "Hey, you know what? You'd be perfect for this. Let me go set up an interview with our team." Had no idea what recruiting was, what staffing was. Couldn't even explain it to my family, but went and took the interview and just saw the culture, saw the camaraderie, and I didn't know anything about the role, but I was like, "Yeah, this looks like a fun environment. Let me jump in." So ended up accepting a role with Aerotech, one of the largest staffing firms in the U.S. and I guess international as well. And basically just got thrown into our national accounts recruitment team, which basically in short means we were recruiting for some of the biggest companies in the US that had the lowest margins, had the lowest paying roles, and basically all the jobs that no one wanted to work on. But we did it, and I was in the trenches, filling these roles, and really just learned what recruitment was. Obviously it started with on the agency side and third party recruitment, but just understood how to actually recruit, go and find people, how to build a candidate profile and a value proposition, and sell folks on opportunities. And so did that for just under a year, and then was given the opportunity to pivot in-house. Joined a Fortune 500 transportation company, and did regional recruitment for them for about 4 years. From there, I'll give you kind of just the walkthrough of what it's looked like from that point. I've done some executive search in the logistics and freight industry. I've ran a staffing agency. I started a franchise location for a staffing agency here in Scottsdale and built that to just under 2 million in revenue in 18 months. And then from there, made the decision to pivot into tech and wanted to really build out talent acquisition operations in the tech space, and have really found kind of a nice pocket for myself in the tech startup world, building out talent acquisition engines and handling things beyond just direct recruitment. So doing things like employer branding, DEI strategy, building out tech-enabled, systems for us to be able to leverage and speed up our process so that we're not only more effective, but we're more efficient as well. So that's me in a nutshell. Have a pretty well-rounded background in recruitment, and honestly have a lot of respect for both sides, both in-house and agency recruitment. I think we need both in different contexts. So, yeah.
For sure, yeah. And I think your experience, particularly early in your career when you're recruiting for some of those really tough to fill roles, like you said, the roles that nobody wants to hire for, I find that when talent acquisition leaders start in that type of environment earlier in their career, it really helps them build some discipline and build process and strategies that they're able to leverage later in their career when they're working maybe some more desirable roles, or they're at a upstart tech company that people are excited about working at. But because you're rooted in some of those principles that you learned when it was like, hey, I got to be really good at recruiting if I want to attract people for this position I'm recruiting for, it probably makes your job a lot easier now, in the sense that you built that foundation for the way that you approach recruiting. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a certain level of scrappiness and grit that I think recruiters need to have, no matter how sexy of a company you work for or how awesome your roles are that you feel like are easy to fill. there's going to be those periods where, whether the market changes and there's not a ton of inbound applicants coming in, or you're working on a very hard to fill niche role, you're going to have to buckle down, right? And you're going to have to go and know how to go find people, uncover rocks and opportunities, and be able to really create a strong and compelling value proposition to someone, to be able to, show them and clearly demonstrate why the opportunity at hand is a great career move for them. So I attribute a lot of that to the agency background where, we had to cold call. We had to go through our database and find people who maybe we hadn't even engaged with in 3 years, but just to say, hey, how are you doing? Is there a potential to kind of show you this opportunity and what it could bring to your career? And that kind of experience is invaluable. And I found that it creates a certain mentality, I think, within recruiters that maybe you don't have if you're coming from more of the HR side or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely probably makes you more, proactive, right? And, you brought up the market and certain market conditions. And I think sometimes, an organization's hiring kind of follows whatever the conditions are. But I think the reality is if you build that foundation in a really tough environment and you really, really learn about, what makes a team good at hiring, no matter what the market conditions look like in the future, you're prepared to handle them. And even when the market conditions are really good, you're also still proactive, where you're not just relying on those market conditions to drive applicants or, make the job look really attractive. You've got a lot of other things going for you from your past that you're able to apply. And so probably serves as a big competitive advantage for you and then the teams that you work on. And speaking of the teams you work on, so you're at Worldly now. Can you tell me a little bit about the company?
Absolutely. So Worldly, we're a B2B SaaS company, if I were to give it a general kind of definition, but more so than that, we're a sustainability insights platform serving consumer good brands. And essentially what we're helping these companies do is gain, visibility into their supply chain, from end to end, so they can see what their true impact is. There's a lot of really interesting and crazy, in some capacities, regulation and policy that is in the market now, where companies now have to be, reporting on this type of data. And so it's very mission critical what we're doing. But we're essentially just trying to create a platform where these brands can go in and really measure everything that's happening in their supply chain. So we're also working heavily with their vendors and their manufacturers, and their suppliers to be able to understand what's happening and where improvements can be made. We are a fully global and distributed organization, which is a really awesome thing for us, being able to tackle a global problem like supply chain and sustainability issues. But it's, we're really focused on, kind of solving this big problem in the market, or at least, leading the way as we try to solve it. And our company has been around for 5 years now. We've gone through some changes, some iterations, but fortunate to be, partnered with some of the smartest people that I've ever met or worked with, and being able to kind of collaborate and rally around this strong mission is a huge value for me.
That's great. And so you've been there for almost 2 years at this point, based on what I could see on your LinkedIn. When you joined the company, obviously it was, still a really young company, only a few years old at that point. So when you came on board, were there specific challenges or specific objectives that were laid out for you? And was that a reason for you to join? And what were those objectives when you came on board?
Yes, absolutely. And that actually was a big factor in me joining Worldly. Keep in mind at the time when I joined, the market was completely flipped for talent acquisition folks. So there was plenty of opportunities around at that time. But, for me, I was tasked with coming in and building out a talent acquisition function that didn't really exist at that point, which included, integrating an ATS and being able to kind of train and develop our hiring managers and our hiring teams on the workflows required. That included enablement, creating resources, interview guides, things like that for our hiring team to leverage and use, providing trainings on, what the expectations were, and, how to utilize these resources to drive good hiring decisions and good decision making. Also, partnering with our marketing team to really build out the idea of a recruitment marketing or an employer branding strategy. We've redesigned our career site a couple times, added new things in. We're always kind of testing. We redid and have played around with our, our format for our job descriptions, really trying to create the most compelling document for, candidates coming in. How do we capture their attention in the first like 2 to 3 seconds, right? And allow them to gain more interest in our opportunity. We've played around with, the nurture process for candidates that are in our funnel, and how do we keep them better engaged and better educated as they move through the process? We don't want them to necessarily be waiting in limbo when they're, waiting to be scheduled for their next interview. There's educational documents that we can send them. There's resources we can send them to look into and research our company more. So there's a wide variety of things that I was tasked with building, and some of it was my ideation, some of it was partnership with our executive team and what they saw as necessary. But that actually played a big factor in my decision, to join the team. I see myself as a builder. I'm somebody who likes to be creative in the talent acquisition and recruitment process. I like strategy, but I'm also a strong operator, and so I was able to kind of come in and marry the two, and really just get creative, try things, measure them, manage them. Do they work? Do they not work? And if they don't, let's pivot and try something else.
That's great. And what's the makeup of the talent acquisition team? Is it just you, or do you have other people on the squad?
Yeah, currently just me. We've kind of gone through some waves. Last year, or actually 2022 and early part of 2023, we had a small team. We do also have a kind of a deck or a bench, I would say, of fractional recruiters and agency recruiters that we'll bring in and leverage for key situations. But that's a big problem I'm actually working to solve right now. Maybe not a problem, but it's a big thing I'm trying to solve for, is creating a very tech-enabled and efficient system for a one-person talent acquisition function. How do we bring in the right tools and have the right resources at hand so that one person isn't tied up, just evaluating resumes that are coming in, but are able to be freed up to do some of that outbound strategy, right? Or some of that recruitment marketing, or some of these other key projects that the team needs. So that's a thing that I'm always working to solve for, but it's definitely something that's front of mind for me right now.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And that's what I've been seeing a lot in today's market is, whether it's a solo person team or just a lean talent acquisition team in general, supporting a decent number of hiring managers, obviously that creates a lot of challenges. I'd be curious from your perspective, you guys, like you mentioned, you're a global distributed company. Does that present, specific challenges being remote and being a one-person team and supporting hiring managers that potentially are all over the world?
For sure. I don't know that it's really a problem that everyone's distributed, but I think the remote aspect is interesting. I think it creates its own kind of layer of challenges, right? Namely that you can't go and tap someone's office door and say, hey, I need some feedback, or let's meet real quick and get clear on something. Requires a lot more coordination, and honestly, it requires the person on the other side to be willing to, hop on that call or make time for that as a priority. So I think it does present its own unique challenges. On the flip side of that, I would say it also creates a lot of opportunity from the candidate side and the interview side, right? We're able to meet with candidates from all over the world. Whether or not you're a fan of Zoom or not, it's basically how our culture is built, and but it allows for us to be a lot more kind of creative and give a lot more opportunity to meet with folks rather than having to have people drive into the office, right, and meet with someone in person. And in those rare situations where we do feel it's important to meet with someone before we hire them in person, then we have to coordinate in-person meetings, and whether it's at their location or somewhere in the middle or things like that, which I think is a really interesting thing that I haven't had a ton of experience of or with outside of Worldly. But for the most part, I think the remote thing, it is a bit of a challenge. It presents its own kind of unique things that you have to work through, but I still see it as a massive opportunity and a massive thing that we can leverage, right? I mean, it's a huge selling point still for a lot of candidates, and we've been able to see Worldly grow as a company, as a fully remote organization. It's not that we switched to fully remote during the pandemic. We've always been built that way. So it's allowed us to get really thoughtful about, how do we build a truly remote culture where people can thrive and develop in their career.
Yeah, and in some ways it almost instills some better practices in the way that you have to build out the talent acquisition strategy and your collaboration with hiring managers. Like, to your point, if you're in person, sure, you could go and knock on somebody's door and interrupt them from whatever they're doing at that moment and ask for feedback or nudge them along. But that might not be the best thing either, right? And the best way to collaborate. And so what this forces you to do is think about, how can we enable it through the tech or the ATS we use? How can we enable it through a better process and tighter communication and managing expectations with hiring managers up front? How do we enforce it with the data that we present about how the hiring process is being run, so we can enforce the things that we want to do and show hiring managers what's working and not working? So, some of what we may perceive as shortcomings, because we're fully distributed at this point too. Like, we've got some offices, but pretty much everybody's all over the world. And we had to shift, like, during the pandemic. We used to be an in-office company. And so, it's just required us to put a lot more time and attention into process, transparency around process, and like measuring, does the process actually work? And that was one of the things I really want to talk to you about, because I saw one of your LinkedIn posts. I think the quote was, "Create clarity so you can enable consistency." From a lot of conversations I'd had with other talent acquisition leaders, I've heard about, there's so many different potential points of failure within the hiring process. And the points of failure are really like compounded and really exposed when you don't have a tight process and you're not doing things consistently. So, what have you done, especially, being a one-person team and supporting a bunch of different managers? What have you done to really drive consistent process and hold hiring managers accountable, or I guess work with them better on ensuring you both stay accountable towards running that tight process?
Yeah, well, let me start by saying I think great process starts with that clarity and alignment, and that was really kind of the point of that line. The biggest problems I've ever run into, or I guess the most common problems I've ever run into, or bottlenecks in the hiring process, always comes back to misalignment somehow between recruitment and the hiring team. And maybe it's not even just between talent acquisition and the hiring team. Maybe it's just the hiring managers at every step of the interview process, right? Maybe they're not clear on what they're looking for or what needs to be assessed. And so I think great process starts with making sure that everybody is on the same page. And that sounds very common sense, but what I'm learning and what I've learned over time is that, even just doing you might think you do a great job in your kickoff call or your intake meeting with the hiring manager. But what you realize as you get into the interview process is, oh, there's other people outside of just this direct hiring manager that are influencing the decision making, right? Or maybe something I didn't address it fully, and it's now coming to bear in this process, and it's become much more relevant than I thought it would be. And so what I'm trying to do consistently, and I think this is an ever evolving process, but look at how do we really button up our intake and our kickoff call to make sure that we're really truly clear on the candidate profile that we're going after. And that starts with what I'm looking at now, and what I'm really trying to leverage now is AI to help kind of create these resources that I can bring to the intake meeting, rather than saying, hey, we'll create the job description after we do our intake meeting and we talk about what we're looking for. Instead saying, hey, let me use AI to generate a really good job description for this role that obviously we can tweak, and we can adjust after we meet and understand where the nuances are. But I can bring this at least to the conversation, and we can just make sure that, hey, is this the general realm of what we're looking for, or are we way off here, right? The other thing you can do there is use AI to kind of custom generate some questions, right, on what whether it's in the screening process or it's the hiring manager interview, but to say, hey, look, based off of the profile that I'm seeing from this job description, these are the kind of questions I would like to probably ask. Am I on the right track here? Are we assessing for the right things, or do we need to make adjustments, and are we completely missing the mark? A lot of times I've found that in intake meetings and kickoff calls, we are kind of just data collecting, right? We're just hearing the hiring manager spew from their head what they're thinking about. but we're not really formalizing, the things that we're going to be screening for, or what the process is going to look like, or what the job description requires. And when we do that, you may be a really strong recruiter, but the chances of you missing key information, or key information falling through the cracks, um, it becomes higher, the risk of that. So what I'm trying to solve for now is, how do we do everything on our end to really button up this process early on, so that we can limit the amount of changes or pivots that need to happen mid-process because we forgot something, or we didn't spend enough time talking about one thing that actually became a really critical part of the process. So I think it all starts there. You start with clarity, you start with alignment, and when you do that, your process becomes much easier to build, because everybody now is on the same page, right? Everybody understands what their role is, and what they're assessing for, and what data they need to collect, and then how to report on it. Are making sure that everybody is enabled to submit that feedback in the ATS, or if you're not using your ATS and you want to do it on a Google form or something, that's fine. Just make sure that everybody's clear on where this data is going to be collected, and how everybody should be playing their part. So that's my philosophy around it. There's a lot that goes into that, but if you can start with clarity and alignment, then everything else really becomes easier.
Yeah, and I love, it almost sounds like your kickoff is more of a workshop where you're coming to the table with something, whether it's something you create or something, you use AI for inspiration for. Yeah, right. It's like the hardest thing to do sometimes for hiring managers is to start putting pen to paper. And so when you just give people a blank slate, it's really hard to get the ball rolling, and you can just waste a ton of time, like you said, just talking out loud, but not making really any progress towards clarity. And then often what happens is that becomes the kickoff. And then it's like, okay, everybody, we'll go break away. Now we'll go craft the job description. I'll send it over to you to review. And like all this work kind of happens after the kickoff. And then nobody really regroups again to make sure, are we really clear? And so I think it becomes kind of like a game of telephone, where if you don't create a lot of clarity early on, then everything's the message is diluted when you start working asynchronously and just pushing paper back and forth about how you're going to run things, what the job description looks like, et cetera. So I like that you're taking a more active approach, and it gets the hiring manager right in the mindset of, am I close? Am I not? What do we need to change? It gets them in a working mode mindset versus, coming in and saying, tell me what you got.
Yeah, and I think the mindset change for me, honestly, Josh, was moving away from being an order taker to thinking more as a strategic advisor, right? I strongly encourage every recruiter, whether you're in a leadership position or not, to position yourself and enable yourself as a strategic advisor to the business. And you can do that by coming to these meetings, and coming to these first conversations with hiring managers prepared, right? Do some research. Do a quick like analysis of the talent market. Bring a hit list of top candidates that you've kind of sourced already, and be like, hey, do these profiles look like the type of people we want to go after? Here's what the market is bearing out. Here, from a compensation standpoint, if you can even get into this side of things, here's what I'm hearing about what's going on in the market right now. So it's just a different way of looking at your role, right? It's not, okay, I'm going to sit here and just wait for hiring teams or my hiring manager to kind of give me the instructions, and then I'll be this good soldier and go and find the right person and try not to make any waves. It's like, no, we need to come prepared as an advisor. We're the ones who are experts in hiring, talent acquisition, and our industry really. And a lot of times hiring managers, they have this kind of big view of what they need out of the role, but they have a hard time formalizing that into a clear and actionable process. And that's where we come in. And so I think if we can shift our mindset from I'm going to just wait for the hiring team to bring this to me, to no, I'm going to be the one to bring it to the hiring team, and then we'll work on it together and create something together that works.
It makes a ton of sense. And I think especially, as we started talking about a little bit earlier, in today's market with these lean talent acquisition teams, you need your hiring managers to be an active participant in the hiring process, and not somebody that's just throwing things over the fence to the talent acquisition team to then take and figure out. At the end of the day, you as a talent acquisition team, you're going to get from your hiring managers what you subsidize. in the sense that if you're allowing them to just like spew information at you and then you take it and kind of, work in a black box and try and figure everything out on your own to, like you said, not make any waves, you're not going to have a very engaged hiring manager in the process. And they're not going to be able to see you as the strategic advisor that you are. And so I think by creating the dynamic of, hey, we're not just going to be an order taker, we're going to come to the table with something actionable that we're going to work with you on. We're going to define what the hiring process is like, and we're going to work with you at every single step to be a steward and to empower you to ultimately get the person that you need for your team. That's truly how you're going to build that like symbiotic relationship with hiring managers versus, like you mentioned, the order taker type of role where hiring managers are just pushing everything over. You're having a hard time tracking the things you need down from them. And that's just not a recipe for success. I see it a lot like, this happens, I think, in organizations too with marketing. In all, a lot of departments trying to make marketing an order taker, where it's like, oh, we need a piece of content, or oh, we need this. Like, just kick it over to marketing, let them write something. And if marketing just does everything that every team sends over them to ask or asks of them, the other teams don't learn to think strategically about what can we get done ourselves. And that actually helps the company move faster, because otherwise you're just creating, bottlenecks with the marketing team. So I think it's a similar thing where, as a talent acquisition team, you have to empower hiring managers to be an active participant, to think more strategically. You have to ask them the right questions to make sure that you're getting clarity on what they're looking for, and not just take everything at face value. And I think those are the types of disciplines that you need in order to really make, the process truly collaborative and set yourself up for success. Because at the end of the day, if you're a one-person team, you're a three-person team, and you're supporting dozens and dozens of hiring managers, you need them. You really need them as an active participant in order for the hiring process to work.
Agreed.
And so, from your perspective, I know, just reading some of the content that you post out on LinkedIn, you're a very data-driven guy. So you're looking at a lot of different metrics. How are you using the data that you're collecting throughout the hiring process and when you're recapping hiring processes to help hiring managers see, what are we doing well? What can we be doing better? And see the impact of the things that you guys are working on together?
I love this question, and this is an area, in full transparency, that I'm always trying to get better in. I know a lot of folks in rec ops that are, they're all about the data and the metrics, and they can, put together these complex KPI dashboards. In a startup, I don't think it necessarily needs to be at that level. I think what you need to do is find actual data and metrics that tells a story and is relevant to the business. And so, I'm always looking to create a very kind of like straightforward dashboard of metrics that, again, tie into the story of where we're trying to go as an organization. Things like time to fill, which are very common in the talent acquisition space. I actually don't like that as an individual recruitment metric, or an individual talent acquisition metric, because I think there's so many factors that influence that number. What I do like that metric for is to be able to dig into it and look at the time to fill or the time to hire on each team, and to be able to say, hey, okay, this team over here is well within our time to fill metric, right? They're, much more efficient. You look at your pipeline metrics and you look at how long each candidate is spending in each stage of the interview process. It's very balanced. It's very even. When you go over to this team, they're well above what our core metric is from a time to fill standpoint. If you look at their pipeline, they have candidates hanging out in the first interview process, for 6 weeks, right? And then, there's this long gap between when they're moved to the next stage. And then you can really see and pinpoint where the potential bottlenecks are. So it's not necessarily just looking at the metric from an organizational standpoint, but from a team standpoint, to be able to understand, okay, where are the opportunities for us? Is there training or, learning and development that we can offer to that team, to make sure that they're, clear on what needs to be improved? And I'm a strong believer in, especially if you're hiring on a consistent basis, getting together with your hiring teams on whether it's quarterly, monthly, whatever it may be, and not just to say, hey, what's upcoming, what do you need, but to say, hey, let's take a look at your metrics, your team's metrics for the last, 90 days or 6 months, and see, how you guys ranked against what our core metrics are, what are some things that we can be doing better to drive more efficient processes and also drive higher quality on the higher side.
Yeah, totally. And I like the point you bring up because you ask a lot of people what metrics are you looking at, and everybody will say time to hire, time to fill, which, like you mentioned, is a great metric to look at. But at the end of the day, that's the outcome of your process. It really doesn't tell you what's happening within your process, other than, like you mentioned, you can compare, time to fill for one team or one role versus another and see, where you're doing better, where you're doing worse. But ultimately, it just tells you what you need to inspect further. And that's really, for me, I personally like to look at the time per stage, because that's where you just mentioned, you see, oh, well, yeah, our time to hire is being dragged out because people are sitting in the first interview round for 6 weeks or whatever it is. It's like, okay, we have to do something about that. And that's where you're then able to address those bottlenecks. And in some cases, you might find out, which it seems like you guys are already doing, because you mentioned it earlier in the call, you might find out, like, we've compressed this one stage as much as we possibly can. Like, how can we make it better? Most people might say, like, oh, well, we can't make it any shorter. And that might be the case. You can't really shrink whatever that time is between the stage, but there are things you can do between those stages to make it better. And it sounds like you guys are doing that by, like, hey, okay, maybe we can't shrink the time here, but what we can do is we can send them a piece of educational content to bridge the gap from this stage to the next. And that adds value, and it answers questions they have, and it provides clarity to the candidate and tells them what's next. And so, like, it's not always just about, like, reduce time, because at a certain point there's diminishing returns, and you're only able to move so fast when you've got to coordinate with different people. And so then it becomes about, how do we add value to the stage of the process? So I love that you guys are doing that already. What are some of those pieces of content you guys are inserting throughout the hiring process? Like, what would a good example be?
Yeah, I think just sharing, more information on, our backstory as a company, more information on our product. We're in a very, what I would call, like, complex industry, not only just from the technology standpoint, but from the sustainability standpoint. Most people don't understand what sustainability is and what that looks like and how it's measured. And so a lot of times, I mean, there's a pretty big learning curve joining the company, from just learning the technology and, the standard things that you would need to learn when you come into a company. But then also, if you're not coming from sustainability or you don't have a background in it, it's a pretty big learning curve, right? To understand what we're actually trying to solve for and what the market looks like. So, a lot of times what I try to do is send out information on, more about who we are, what we're about, even a little bit of information on our values. And then, yeah, just more information on the product, updates on what we're currently working on. And then also just, I think the other piece of this, and even if you don't have, I don't think every communication touch point needs to have like a link to an article or a video or something. I think just being good at, like, consistently following up. So setting weekly cadences, even if you don't have an update for a candidate, just touch point and say, hey, I don't have an update for you, quite honestly, but I haven't forgotten about you. I just want you to know and be updated on where we're at in the process. Like that goes so far for so many people, because it's like, hey, the worst part of the interview process for a lot of candidates is that limbo phase when you're, whether it's you applied, haven't heard back, or you interviewed and you're waiting for feedback, right? Like, just sitting there, you're not knowing is worse than knowing that there's no update. So for me, my perspective is, it doesn't always need to be informational, educational. It can just be, hey, I see you, you're still there. I haven't forgotten about you. We just don't have an update quite yet. And I think that goes a lot further than people actually think.
Yeah, totally. And it gives you a competitive advantage. And I think that is really coming from your operator background, like you mentioned at the beginning of the call. I think when you're able to break things down and look at every step of the process and look at, like, how can we keep layering things on that are going to separate us from everybody else? And it might be the smallest thing, and that one small thing isn't going to make all the difference. But when you layer these things on top of each other and you're, like, methodically doing this quarter over quarter and improving your process, improving your communication, improving clarity with hiring managers, all those things add up over time. And I think not enough teams are proactively doing that. So it's good to hear that you're connecting with the team, quarterly at a minimum, and just reviewing, like, what can we be doing better? And then actioning those things out. I think that's really important. And The other thing I saw on LinkedIn, and forgive me, I did a little bit of a deep dive because I just enjoy your content so much. You put so much good stuff out there. One of the things I saw, you posted a video about, I think it was pretty recently, but it was talking about one of the biggest challenges for talent acquisition teams. And the thing you were specifically talking about was influencing others in the hiring process. Can you expand a little bit on that for the audience? And like, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it looks differently, when you think about the full kind of recruitment process. But I think influencing means, one, from a candidate standpoint, preparing and educating candidates as they enter your process. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink, is the old saying. And so you can have a candidate that checks all the boxes, and on paper looks great, and you meet with them, and maybe they even have good energy in that first call, and you see the clear fit with the role. But as you prep them and kind of work with them, to get prepared for the interview process, you can't control essentially what they do when they enter that interview, right? And I've had plenty of great candidates that did well in the first stage. They checked all the boxes. You present them. You present them to the team, and the team likes them, and then they meet with them, and they completely bomb the interview, right? And so that's a challenge. I think the other aspect of it is from kind of the company side, influencing and working with hiring managers, making sure that they're prepared, that they're enabled, that they're clear on what the market is showing. And being able to kind of sell them as well on candidates, and to look at things a little bit more abstractly than just saying, hey, and this is something I'm a big proponent of. I don't want hiring managers just making evaluations or assessments based off a person's resume, because a resume just tells one piece of the story. And so I want to make sure that we're, as we enter an interview process or a recruitment process, that we're able to, look at the resume as a resource, yes, but also once we've had the chance to meet with them, dissect that information and get the full picture of what their previous roles were, and their story and their journey to get them to where they are. So really just helping kind of influence hiring managers to get out of these norms or these biases that they have, right? Or these, bad behaviors that they've learned over the course of their career, recruiting in companies, or helping with recruiting in companies that weren't doing things equitably, or in the right way. So I think influence it's a very key part of being a really great strategic recruiter, and especially a recruitment leader, to be able to influence both sides. Now, are we going to ever have full control over what other people are doing? No, that's the hardest part of recruiting and hiring. But what we can do is look for those gaps and those opportunities and try to fill them, right? And be trying to do everything in our power. And that was really the point of my post is, a lot of times recruiters and talent acquisition folks will become very comfortable with saying, well, here's my metrics, here's what I've done. Now I don't care what the hiring managers do. Like, if it fails or it bombs, it's not on me. I'm covered. I've got my butt covered. And I'm encouraging us to take a step further and take more ownership over that, to say, yes, it may not have been something that was an oversight by you, but what could we have done better to prevent that in the future? What is the learning here? What is the thing that we can be doing to improve? Because again, if you don't try to solve these problems, they don't go away. In fact, they compound, right? And they become issues over time, especially if you're in a startup where, you might be starting here, but over time you would expect the company to grow, and your hiring is going to scale. And so your problems scale at that point if you don't solve them.
Yep. And I think the key there, and we've talked about it a lot on this call, really what it comes down to, the theme is control the controllables, right? And I think a lot of folks maybe think there's more that's out of their control than actually is. And so, like we just discussed, talking about all the different points of failure in the hiring process, and talking about how you can look for all the bottlenecks in your process and what are the things you can do. And maybe you can't shorten the step, but you can add a touch point here, like breaking all those things down and layering them on top of each other. That will all compound in a good way, just as ignoring them and saying, you know what, I can't do anything about it, will compound in a bad way. And ultimately, like you mentioned, some of it's self-reflection. Some of it, as a talent acquisition leader, you got to look yourself in the mirror and say, what could I have done better? throughout this process to have, empower the hiring manager better or prepare the candidate better or whatever it is. So there's some of that internal, reflection. But then there's also, learning from your candidates and learning from your hiring managers and having those discussions and gathering that feedback and that advice. Because at the end of the day, like your candidates, your hiring managers, they will tell you what they need to do things better, but you've got to ask and you've got to dig in and you've got to be proactive about it. And they'll give you the answers, and then it's up to you to execute. And at the end of the day, as a talent acquisition leader, that's what your role is. You're a steward in the process. You've got to be strategic, and if you want to be looked at as strategic in the business, it takes that level of proactiveness to make it happen.
That's a great point. And honestly, that's a big driver for the type of content that I share, because my personal perspective, I'm not going to say I'm right necessarily in this perspective, but this is just what I've perceived, is a lot of talent acquisition folks, we've learned how to, do the kind of core recruitment functions. We've learned how the process looks. We know how to use an ATS at a baseline level. And we've become very comfortable with doing the same thing over and over again and not be looking for continuous improvement. And what I'm challenging, my community with is we need to think the complete opposite of that. We need to not be comfortable with, okay, great, we're meeting our metrics, we are filling these roles. That doesn't necessarily equal, the best amount of success that we can achieve from a talent acquisition standpoint. And I think more folks need to be thinking about this, especially as we start talking about technology entering the market, AI playing a role in the recruitment process. I think companies over time are going to lean heavily on, tech-enabled systems to, be able to do more with less. And so recruiters really need to be dialed in on what are we doing, what's the value that we're providing, what's the clear business case that we can share with the organization as to what we're doing and how it's providing value. And so I just think that talent acquisition folks need to shift their thinking a little bit and be a little more honest with themselves and with the market to say what we're doing isn't 100% effective. Like there's a lot of things we can be doing better.
Yeah, and what works today might not work tomorrow as well, right? And so if you're not constantly looking for ways to improve or take things to the next level, sure, maybe things seem to be going fine now, but 6-12 months from now, especially the way tech is moving with dramatic shifts in just like the macroeconomic environment, things can change very, very quickly. And if you're not doing things to constantly progress, very quickly you can find yourself behind. And then when your organization needs to ramp up recruiting and hire people, that ultimately is going to be the key driver of success for the business. If you're getting outpaced by competing employers, it puts you, the talent acquisition team, and the company in a tough spot.
Agreed.
Cool. Well, Andrew, this has been awesome. I really appreciate the time. I'm so happy we were able to connect. Like I said, I've been keeping up with all of your content on LinkedIn, and just can't say enough how much I believe in everything you're saying. It's like you're just preaching to the choir here. So really appreciate everything you do, and thanks so much for joining me. And I know everybody that listens to us is going to love all the insight you provided.
Thanks for the invite, Josh. It's been great.
Cool.